Mr. Kevin, to start this conversation, I would request you to, since you have been across Fortune 100 companies and have a wonderful career so far, I would like to, uh, I would like to request you to quickly walk me through overall career. How has the journey been? And when you look
Wow.
back, what has been some of the closest moments that you still cherish today?
So, wow. I'm not sure I'm not sure the audience would love to hear every single role, but we can talk a little bit about my history. So, I've been in technology for 33 plus years. So that road has been very long to get to where I am today. But like most people in technology and engineering, you start off at the bottom, right? And you work your way up that ladder through ambition, through drive, through setting goals for yourself. Um, but I think the key thing about my journey is learning, right? And I think it's brought me to where I am today. So every single position that I've taken across my career has been for a purpose of learning something. I've never once taken a job just to take a job. I've been very fortunate in that respect where I've never been in that position. So it's allowed me to turn around and pick and choose who I wanted to work for and do the roles that I thought that were most meaningful for me. And there's been many examples in my career where I've taken either pay cuts or some other diminished outcome for the longer term benefit of what I was going to learn and what I was going to get out of that experience. So that I can tell you is that every single role that I've done has been very strategic up until this point. Okay. In terms of like milestones, I think a lot of people get caught up in either, whatever contract they signed or, how much money they made or this, that, and the other thing. Me, I kind of measure the success in my career mainly around the people that I work with. And what I mean by that is I'm a big mentor. I like to bring people up and help them grow. I find a lot of satisfaction in that. And I think throughout my career, I've made some very, very deep relationships, which have yielded more than I could even have imagined over the years in terms of professional growth, personal friendships. But they've been lasting. Where I think a lot of people these days look at jobs, it's just a small time here. I'm going to be here a year or two. I'm going to jump to the next thing, and you might keep in contact with some people, but maybe not. You're not really thinking about them. You're thinking about what's ahead and not looking what's from behind. But I think there's a lot of real things to learn from those relationships. So I think one of the things that I most cherish as an achievement is that I keep in contact with a lot of professional people that I worked with over the years. And I built relationships based on respect both ways. And I'm very fortunate to be able to pick up a phone if I needed to and call somebody and say, hey, I have a role. And before I could probably finish explaining the role, they're ready to say, hey, I'm ready to work with you again. And to kind of build that kind of community, I think is the ultimate achievement for me.
Absolutely true. And if I have to recall one of my recent conversations with the global HR, with the global CHRO of Optim USA, so the advice he gave to me was build connections. You will find thousands of companies to work, but you would not find the same people again. So what a wonderful start to this conversation. So as you mentioned that your biggest achievement is the relations you have built over the year. And if I may ask you, what has been the most complex transformations, be it
Hmm.
in regards to people and you being the COO and owner of a company, transformation in regards to process or people that you have led in your career? And how did that change your approach to leadership?
That's an interesting question. So I would tell you there's a couple times in my career that I found transformation really challenging. One of them was very early on in my career when in the early days of Priceline.com, before they were a global powerhouse in the travel industry. We were a small, group of kids roaming around in bathrobes and bunny slippers in an office, right? Trying to come up with ideas and figure out how to make Priceline the thing that it is today. And I'm very proud to be part of that journey. But I think the tough part of that transformation was going from, and we saw success very, very early. But it was, as any startup, it was fast and it's loose and it's not very restrictive. Um, but once you get to a level of maturity in an organization, process and procedure needs to become more in line, right? You can't be so fast and loose and flexible as you are as when you're in that startup in the garage kind of mode. And I think that was my first big transformation was taking the team that I was responsible for, which was for support and network project management, and to be able to get people to kind of change that mindset without sacrificing the fun, without sacrificing the camaraderie that we had built as an organization. And of course, when you start layering on process and procedure and all these things become more corporate in structure, some people can kind of resist that, right? Especially since they've been kind of unchecked for so long. So kind of that transformation, how do you bring people along, getting them to grow, getting them to embrace that change, which may in some cases be a little bit restrictive, but helping them see the benefits of those things. That was the first real big transformation, I think, from a professional standpoint that I experienced. My second biggest transformation, and this one was not only an organizational transformation, but a personal transformation for me. I worked for a hedge fund called Bridgewater Associates, which is probably the largest hedge fund in the world.
Yep.
And they have a very unique culture there. So for me, I was not only tasked with bringing support and internal structure to a different level of support and efficiency, but then I also had to transform myself within that culture. And we don't have enough time on this interview to go through kind of those details, but it was very spiritual and very personal. And at times it was very emotional in terms of challenge and really being reflective about yourself and where your strengths and your weaknesses are, and then to lay them bare in front of everybody. Not only your superiors, but your subordinates. And that's very, very tough thing to do if you are not raised in that kind of culture. Corporate America kind of says, hey, the ends justify the means. If I make these mistakes, but I end up winning in the end, those mistakes don't matter. Where this transformation was, there's something to learn from everything, regardless of being successful. There's something to learn from that. But every single mistake you make, you should reflect on and figure out, okay, what was the root cause of that? And how can you become better at whatever that thing is, right? And then sometimes it's not just relying on yourself, but realizing when to ask for help and who to ask help from to get the right tools for the job to get done. So that was another, I would call, really large transformation for me, not only professionally, but personally, that I could highlight in my career.
Okay, wonderful. And as you rightly said, bringing together people and process is one of the biggest roadblocks, or let's say a challenge for many startup or entrepreneurs. So you mentioned that has been one of your biggest challenge. So which specific strategies did you pull out to address those challenges?
So I kind of use one strategy, to be honest with you, that I alter, in all different situations. But I'm a big proponent of just being transparent. I think it's not about giving information to people that they want to hear. I think as adults, you should treat people as adults, right? Give them the information as it is. The truth is neither good or bad. It's how you deal with it, right? And I think, when you're trying to bring people who are below you along for the ride, they need to understand why the decisions are being made the way they are. They don't necessarily have to agree, but they have to be in sync and understand the logic that you made that decision, right? And in certain cases, I've also learned to accept the feedback. So by sharing your logic and sharing why you want to do something to the group as a whole, whether it be the people above you or the people below you, it gives them a chance to engage with you, to ask questions about why do you think that's the right cause of action? Why do you think that that decision will give that outcome? And as a leader, it makes you stop and think, where I think most of corporate America would take that as, why are you challenging my authority? I kind of look at it as, I want you to poke holes in the logic. If there's a better logic out there, regardless of where it comes from, that's what we're really wanting anyway, right? Versus the egotistical thing of, it's my idea, or I've got to come up with the idea myself because that's my job. No, my job is to lead. My job is to figure out what is the right course of action, and using those tools, whether I get the answer from myself or the people below me or the people above me, it does not matter. So going back to the base of the question, I think transparency has been my biggest tool, and understanding, right? And I use the term getting in sync. Once again, it's about understanding, not necessarily being in agreement, but allowing people to understand why you made those decisions, and then giving leaders like myself the moment of pause to question, okay, wait a minute, why do I think that is the right course of action? That's a great question. Let me answer that. And taking that moment of pause to really reflect. And I think the best solutions come out of that stuff. And now I'm not advocating leadership as a democracy, because ultimately whoever's in the position to make that decision, right, that's their responsibility. But how they come up with that decision is entirely up to them. So that's kind of the strategy that I've been employing for 30 plus years now, which is give people the information, be honest with them. Don't be afraid to have somebody question your decision. Don't be afraid for someone to question your logic. Leave the ego at the door. And I think when you get people engaged and they feel that they're part of the solution, a part of the decision-making process, it's so much easier for them to follow along then at that point, because they have a vested interest in what you're trying to accomplish or what you're trying to do.
Okay, wonderful. And Mr. Kevin, I was just going through your overall trajectory. So you started back in 1994 as a help desk manager. And over the last 3 decades, you have been into different roles, worked with different companies that have had different culture, right? So you have having seen the very evolution of workplace, work culture, and team. How has you evolved as a leader over these years?
Oh, wow. That's a huge question. I think I can probably sum up in a couple aspects. For me personally, I think I've gotten more comfortable with the fact that I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to have all the answers. And I think coming to that realization, because when you've had success early on in your career and you're an individual contributor, right? And it's all based on you and what you can do. And you get this false sense of achievement, I think sometimes, not to belittle the achievements that we do experience, but I think we take those achievements and we think we're invincible. And then as you get older and you become wiser and you start leading other people, you start realizing that, okay, the ego, that you've built up over the years and the self-confidence, okay, now it's more about the team, right? And how do you get the value out of other people and less out of yourself, right? And putting that ego aside, that it's not you, right? Yes, you as the leader, you have a certain level of spotlight that you get anyway in corporate America when you lead a team. But I think it's also equally important to share that light with the people who are doing the work, right? So getting that moment to step back, right? And accept the fact that, yes, but this is what I got out of the team. The team, this person, they're the ones who really make this thing happen. I'm just the one at the top of the chain, right? So I think that was the first real lesson for me. And taking that step back from the ego. I think the next step was having this mindset of, well, I've got to do the thing, even though I'm not good at it. Whatever the task is, it's my job, versus the mindset of, I may not be the best person to do that task. Go and find somebody within the team or within the organization that's really good at that thing, right? And ask them to come and participate in the project. Even if it's somebody above you, below you, it doesn't matter. We fall into this habit of cooking with what you've got, versus going out and finding the best tool for the job. And whether it's ego or we don't want to look capable or whatever it is, it stops a lot of people from expanding out, right? But it also stops them from reflecting on what their strengths and weaknesses are, right? And getting in sync in those things and realizing that you may be able to increase some of your weaknesses, but you may not be able to overcome them all, right? So how do you guardrail against that? Who do you bring around you in your orbit as a leader to compensate for some of your weaknesses, who complement you in a good way? So I think that's the next evolution for me over those years. So I think those would be my two big ones. If I had to throw a third one in there, I would tell you it's just listening, and it's different than hearing. A lot of people say, well, I listen. And I think they really mean, I hear what you're saying. Listening in my mind is more retaking what someone has said and really reflecting on it and trying to interpret what they're really trying to say, possibly, right? Communication is so hard as it is. It's important to try to be as clear as possible as the receiver. So I think some of the times listening and taking away the value of that conversation is so important. And I think less talking, more listening.
Beautiful. And when a leader is at the top, over the time, I interviewed many C-level executives, CXOs, and they had one thing in common. They had nobody they can turn to when they had some questions. So when you sit at the top of a line as a leader, your juniors are expecting you to have all their answers. But as you rightly said, it is not possible for every leader because learning has no end, right? So whom do you turn to for answers of your own questions?
So let me say two things. One, you talk about the subordinates looking to you for answers. I think the majority of corporate America or even the world thinks that way. However, the way we think about it, the way I try to run the organization is that people need to learn to be self-sufficient, right? Part of mentoring somebody is helping them grow, helping them stretch beyond their boundaries, their known boundaries, let's say. So in our organization, I don't try to encourage people to think that we have all the answers. There's a lot of times where someone say, well, I've got this problem. And they come to me and say, okay, so how are you thinking about solving it? Well, I was thinking about telling you, great. Okay. So what are your ideas? And I try to engage with people so that they kind of start thinking through things, feeling empowered, right? I don't want people to think that we have all the answers. I want people who come to me and say, hey, I have a problem. Here's some of the choices I think I have or some options we can look at, and I want to discuss with you, right? So that's the subordinate level. Now, for me personally, as much as I have been fortunate to mentor young people or people who've worked for me over the years, I've been very fortunate to have mentors myself. So, in my 20s, I had several bosses that I looked up to that brought certain things to the table that helped me evolve as an individual. And I think I'm going to reference that first thing I talked about. My biggest achievement is keeping that network of people. It's not only people that have worked for me, but people I've worked for. And so over the years, I've kind of built this organization of people that I'm able to reach out to and say, look, I want to run something by you. Am I thinking about this right? Am I missing something? What do you think I'm blind on here? Whatever the question may be. And it goes back to that philosophy is finding the right tool for the job. So I have a very large network of people that I can turn to for different types of things. And some of them worked for me and some of them I worked for. Some of them are still above me on the food chain, working at other companies. So I think it just comes down to, once again, if you keep those relationships and those networks, then you have people to turn to for whatever the level of situation might be, right? I have very highly technical people in my space where I can say, look, I need help with an API, or am I thinking about this from a cloud perspective? And I got an engineer who's like, yeah, let me tell you about it. And they live and they breathe that sort of thing. And then I have people who are now sitting on, company boards of companies where I can say, hey, you've been in this position before. What do you think? This is how I'm thinking about it, and have a deep conversation. So I've been very fortunate enough, and I can't stress it anymore to anybody, that your network is so important. And if you don't take time to take care of it, feed it, grow it like a living, breathing thing, you're right. You're going to be at a point in your life where you've got no one to talk to.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've always got your family as well. You got your spouse possibly, or a parent or something. So, those are the things that you look for. It depends on the subject, obviously.
Okay. And Mr. Kevin, if I talk about your current role as a owner and COO of Mopeka, what are your biggest challenges in current role?
My biggest challenge, I think, is I think our biggest challenge is there's two things. One, I think our industry can be very tough to be competitive in. And what I mean by that is I'm referring to kind of the fuel industry, not the tech industry as a general, but the fuel industry, which is where the majority of our business takes place today. We are expanding that outside, but I'll talk about that today. And I think one of our biggest challenges is keeping morale as you're building an organization. We're an organization that's very forward thinking. We're very cutting edge. We're very quick in terms of how we develop and how we bring products to market, quality stuff to market, which baffles our competition. And they've told us so. But we're in an industry that I would tell you is 8 to 9 years behind what I would consider, everybody else in corporate America. So they're still starting to learn automation. That's a new word. Integration's a new word. So being a company of techies who are forward thinking and constantly wanting to go to the next thing, it's hard sometimes to keep motivation going when we've got to slow things down because we have to wait for the industry to kind of catch up a little bit, or help the industry to speed up a little bit. So that would be, one of the first challenges. I think the second challenge is when you work with a lot of really, really bright people who are operating at a very elevated level. You've got to have a level of challenge, right? Those people will get bored very easily. So if you're looking to attract and maintain very high quality individuals, you've got to be able to have an environment that keeps feeding them things, whether it be new projects, new ideas, keep them engaged. And once again, mentioning the fact that we're in an industry where they're just now starting to come along, and they're starting to speed up a little bit with a company of, individuals who are very forward thinking. There lies the rub, right? Where they want to get to the next cutting edge thing, but we've got to wait for our customers to catch up. So I think those are the unique challenges we have right now. And like any organization, we have ups and downs, right? Where things can become slow and tedious, and we want to get onto the next shiny thing. But we know it's the right thing to do, and that's what helps us get through. And I think it goes back to what I mentioned before. It's about transparency. If people understand why we're making the decisions, and they can ask questions about the logic and what was the reason for this or that, the other thing, people then can understand a little bit easier. It doesn't mean they have to like it. Doesn't mean they're super happy about it. But at point, they can say like, okay, I understand. We're going to slow down development for now for 6 months while we focus on X, Y, and Z. And even though I'm an engineer and I want to go to the next thing, I get it, right? And that's kind of that's the thing. That's the struggle.
Okay. So if I talk about the tech stack that you have at Mopeka, we can't just let this conversation go without talking about one thing, artificial intelligence. So how are you leveraging it at your company? And which is one technology that you have particularly found transformative?
So let me answer that question a little differently. So as I mentioned before, the fuel industry is about 8 years behind. they are hearing the words artificial intelligence, but most people don't understand what that really means. When you say artificial intelligence in our industry, they think of, oh, there's going to a computer who's going to do my job. That's not possible. Or they think of the Terminator and Skynet and movies that they've seen. But what a lot of them don't understand is that they've been using AI for a while, right? If you're using an algorithm, that's a form of AI. If you use machine learning, that's a form of AI. AI is in many different levels, right? We're not at that level where we have a fully sentient AI product. But we do use AI, and we've been using it more and more and more from an industry perspective. We're seeing a real shift. We kind of use a lot of machine learning and algorithm learning mechanisms for our AI, which allow us to turn around and do projections in the fuel industry. Up till now, the industry as a whole kind of used degree days. So what they're doing is they're looking at house A and say, Mr. Jones, when it's 32 degrees out last January, this is how much fuel they use. So it's 32 degrees out today, so this is how much they must be using now. However, with the technology that we bring to the table, those things no longer are needed, because now you're getting real-time data for the most part, accurate real-time data. You no longer have to worry about thinking about historical data as much. One thing we learned through COVID, as most companies did, is that historical data went out the window, at least in the fuel industry, because most people worked from home. All the historical data was what was telling the fuel industry when people and homes and companies would run out of fuel. Well, that stuff had to change. And the only way to change that was to do more machine learning type technology. So we've been incorporating AI now for a while. Whether our customers fully understand the extent of that, it's not really relevant at this point in time. However, where we're moving to a very AI driven business intelligence tool within our system that will help a lot of our customers who don't have technology backgrounds or don't have tech teams, to help them understand certain key performance metrics within their industry, to help them become better leaders, become better business owners, which would then hopefully make better decisions and grow their businesses in the fuel industry. So that's kind of how we're incorporating AI. Behind the scenes, we are bringing some more interactive AI when it comes to our mobile app that will allow different levels of technical knowledge people to be able to interface with the system, and anywhere from just asking more of a technical question to just a very basic, hey, how do I do something, and having the system find the right materials or the right videos to be able to bring to help those customers. So that's how we're incorporating it, but we're doing it very, very subtly. Our industry tends to be very resistant to change. They tend to not be first adopters, hence why they're 8 years behind. So you've got to be very cautious as you introduce stuff. And sometimes you've got to introduce it behind the scenes, get people comfortable with it before you can move to the next step.
Okay. So, Mr. Kevin, the conversation went so smooth that I almost lost the track of time. So, just since we have final 7 minutes and I have two, three interesting questions left to this conversation, I would
Okay.
request you to keep them short and quick. So, as a business owner, what are the key skills you look in people when building a new or when hiring potential talent?
So I don't look for skills. I look for values. So when I think of people, I look at three levels. There's the values, the abilities, and the skills. The values are the things that are really important to me. Do we share the same values? Things like honesty, hard work, when no one's looking, things like that. Then I look at abilities. The abilities are things you have, either you have them or you don't. Either you have common sense or you don't have common sense. I can't teach that. If you have common sense, I can help you get better at it possibly, but I can't teach that. So there's abilities that I look for, whether it be problem solving, communication, and it all depends on the role that I'm looking to fill. Skills are the least important thing, and most times I don't even look for skills. Skills are things that you can teach. Skills are things that people can learn. But one thing I've learned over the years, that if I've hired somebody who has the skills but doesn't have the abilities and has the values, they're going to be stuck. If they have the skills and the abilities and they don't have the values that I share as an organization, then we're not going to get along. So for me, it's more of a top-down approach. The values and the abilities are the things that I look for. The skills are the least important.
And over the last 30 years, what has been your biggest learnings that you would like to pass to younger generation?
The biggest learning that I think that the younger generations need to hear, whether they want to listen or not, it's another story, is you got to pay your dues. I know everybody's chasing some goal, and a lot of the younger generations we're dealing with now, they're looking at when do I get an office? Why am I in a cube or this, that, and the other thing? They're looking at perks and not really stopping to look at this is, you get out of college and go and they think, well, I'm not learning anymore. I'm now working a job. No, you're still going to school. That's what I want younger generations to learn, is that every single role that you take should be something that you're learning from. If you're taking a job, if you're in a position where you have to take a job to pay bills, that I understand. But if you are not in that position and you have the luxury of choosing who to work for, and what roles you want to do, then be very thoughtful about it. Look at the job from the standpoint of, you should have, every new job should have about 60% of that should be in your wheelhouse, and the other 40% should be a stretch. That should be stuff that you haven't done, stuff for you to grow and learn to do. Every job should be that way. If you move into a job where you're like, hey, I can do this job with my eyes closed, then it's not the right job. It's just, you're not growing. You've stalled. So I love the younger generations to understand that, and be more strategic in how they think about who they want to work for and how they want to be seen, and then put in the dues, right? Work your way up that ladder. Don't assume that, well, I'm going to start somewhere in the middle or at the top. There's a reason, there's a progression, there's a learning. I don't think I would be nearly as successful as I am today if I didn't have to fight and learn and grow from the bottom up, right? If things were just given to me or I assumed I was entitled to them, I don't think I would be nearly as successful as I am today. So I would love the younger generations just to take a moment of pause and kind of reflect on that.
Wonderful. And now, the second last question. As a COO, what do you think are the three most critical skills that every operation leader should possess to survive in coming years?
So I think, I think there's a couple big ones. One of them is going to be communication. If you as a leader can't communicate an idea or a problem, you can't get a solution, right? So you've got to be a really effective communicator, in order to get any answers. I also think you've got to be a very good listener, because if you can't hear what you're being told, or you don't want to hear what you're being told, that's a problem, right? So there's a communication, I think, is a huge skill, and we've lost it. And what I mean by that more is more conversational communication. We tend to hide behind emails and text messages and whatever, but I think we've lost the skill to speak. And I think we're not forcing our subordinates to also, cultivate those skills by putting them on the spot, making them talk, whatever. So I would tell you communication and listening are going to be two of the bigger ones. And then I think the third skill, or ability, I should really say, and it's how do you know the things you don't know, right? There is a process to that. And it's having that realization of like, okay, so there's a lot of information out there, in my future. There's problems, there's great things ahead. How do I figure those things out? What is my process, my personal process to figuring out the things I don't know? I think any effective leader out there who is growing a business or building products that are cutting edge, is creating a market for people, whatever it might be, they are masters in figuring out the things they don't know. And whether it's, keeping that network around them, people to have sounding boards, or knowing how to go and do research, whatever it might be. But I think that's going to be the key thing, versus people saying, well, I know what to do. I see where it's coming from. I see the history and I've got the plan. How do you know? So that's going to be, I think, probably one of the biggest skills that I would tell you that we need over the next 5 to 10 years.
Wonderful. And one thing I instantly connect with was, in this era of email and all these communication tools, leaders have really lost how to communicate. I instantly
They
get it.
have.
Wonderful. Okay.
They,
Yeah, please go ahead.
I truly think I was about to say just very briefly that, spoken word, it's not impossible. You can definitely motivate people from an email or a letter or what have you, but there's something deeply personal and intimate, being able to speak with people, to communicate a problem, to communicate emotion. That I think as an effective leader, you've got to be able to learn. Just because you're good at something, I can manage, right? I got good numbers. That's not enough anymore. You've got to be able as a leader to raise morale, empower people, encourage them. So, that's just something I just can't hammer enough.
Wonderful.